Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reema. I'm working as Research Fellow in Center for Innovation and Biodesign, PGI Chandigarh. So it's my pleasure to welcome all the participants for today's session. I heartily welcome our Principal Investigator, Dr. Varinder Garg, our Co-Principal Investigator, Dr. Harish, and Dr. Sakshi, and the coordinators from all the institutes. Today, we have a session named Research Scientific Misconducts. This session will give you insights about various ethical principles of research and their scientific misconducts. So before the session, I would like to play one video of C.R. Bayardine. Please have a look. Thank you for watching this video. Hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yes, it is. It is
Yeah.
visible.
Now, I'm going to introduce our incubation center. Center for Innovation and Biodesign is the platform funded by ICMR and situated in PGIMR, Chandigarh. It promotes innovation in medical devices and instruments by creating a conductive ecosystem with the involvement of various primer multiple technology institutes. Our mission is to co-create innovative solutions to the existing bottlenecks in affordable healthcare. Now, the objectives of CIBID is innovation in medical devices and other branches of healthcare, automated solutions to various health-related problems, provide manpower training, and also it is a consultancy center, provides solutions to hospitals and various medical areas. Now, I'm going to explain about this program, that is short-term attachment program. This program is organized mainly for young and bright students who want to polish their skills to get involved with cutting-edge health-related technologies. In this program, we will learn about innovation, incubation, prototyping, clinical validation, and commercialization of novel ideas in affordable and scalable healthcare. More than 16 years of experience in teaching and research. Currently, she is holding the position of Dean Students Welfare and Head Department of Life Science at Riyadh Bhara University. Her trusted area of research is mycology and environmental science, with many international and national research publications. She was bestowed with Women Researcher Award during International Research Awards on Science, Health, and Engineering. For many universities or organizations, she is a resource person for academic and social talks on balanced diet and personal hygiene. We welcome you, ma'am.
Thank you, Rima. Thank you so very much.
Now, I requested Dr. Seema to please start the session.
Thank you very much, Rima, for introducing me so well. I hope I am audible to everybody.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are keeping well and getting benefited from the sessions being organized by CBIOD, PGIMER. And you know, CBIOD is an excellent platform, rather, I would say, for the interaction with the budding researcher and especially for the dissemination of the knowledge. I say this is a kind of, a training program for the young researchers. So today I will be discussing about the various ethical guidelines to be followed, like while you are doing any kind of research activity or publishing your content of research. And I will be discussing about various, the scientific misconducts taking place during experiments or while you are collecting any kind of data. And you know very well, it is very, very much important to adhere to the ethical guidelines or the ethical principles to follow in order to protect the dignity, rights, and welfare of the research participants, the subjects who are a part of your, the research work. So let's begin with the ethics. And I will be sharing my screen right now. That is for your better understanding. Is the screen is visible to everybody?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So what is research? And I am expecting the participants to have this interactive session. I will keep asking, the few questions in between. It is not to check your knowledge. It is just for your active participation and to activate your brain actually. So what are the ethics? When we talk about the ethics, we say it is a set of the moral principles and the values. This is how we live our life, right? So basically, this is a discipline of dealing with what is good or bad, right or wrong, with moral duty and the obligation. So when it comes to the research ethics, that means the ethical guidelines, the ethics, the moral values while carrying out any kind of the research activity. So this concerns with the responsibility of the researchers to be very honest and respectful to all the individuals who are affected by their research studies, like who are a subject for your research studies, and the outcome of your studies might carry any kind of effect on the subjects. So basically, this is the responsibility of the researchers, of the scholars, of the students who are carrying out the research activity. So they need to be very honest and be respectful to all the participants, to all the individuals who are a part of their research. Now, the most important question arises, what is the justification of carrying out the research in the humans? We have seen in case of, the COVID-19, the animal testing was done, other trials were done, but still, the vaccine trials are going on the humans, and that is also on the, the different age groups, and even on the mentally impaired, or you can say the people, the pregnant ladies, then the children are there. So different kind of studies is going on. So the people, some people, they are in the opinion, when the animal testing is already being done, then why there is a need to, the carry out the research or to the trial on the human beings? I tell you, it is impossible to reach the important conclusions without studying the humans. And most importantly, if you want to treat the humans, definitely you have to get trial on the humans. And the animal experiments, they don't always predict the results. This is a hard fact. So any kind of vaccine or medicine or drug trial is there on the animals. And when it is being used on the, the human beings, different, type of reactions are there, because the human physiology reacts in a different way to the certain kind of the medicine. So just to check the, the adverse impact or the impact of the medicine on the human beings, we need to carry out the trials on the human beings. But we carry out the trials on the human beings only when we are quite sure it will not lead to any kind of, the severe adverse impact on the human beings. That's why first we go for the animal testing. So this is the justification why we carry out the, the trials on the human beings. And I have mentioned over there, even you are going to treat certain kind of humans, like you must perform with them. Like for the children, for mentally impaired, for the ethnic groups, elderly, women, even for the pregnant women. So just in the case of COVID-19, we have seen when the trials were out, like now this, the vaccine is safe for the pregnant women, only then the doses were administered in those, specific kind of group. And now the trials, they are being conducted on children, and it is safe, it is considered safe for the children also. But yes, we are still waiting for the guidelines. So likewise, the trials are going on, and this is the justification, because they are just checking how the human physiology is reacting to those kind of the medicines or any kind of the drug or the vaccine. Now, why there is a need occurred for this, the ethical codes or the ethical guidelines? In the past history, if you have ever read, you will see at the time of the Nazi or the World War II, the inhuman or unethical experimentations were going on. I've cited few examples over there, like at the time of the Nazi, the breaking and the re-breaking of the bones. They just wanted to see how many times that they could be broken, before healing failed to occur. So this is a really very, inhuman kind of trial or the behavior. Even in the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital, New York, in 1963, the patients, they had been injected with the live cancer cell just to see the impact of the cancer cells on the, the multiple organs of the human beings, to which extent they could carry negative impact or lead to the multiple organ failure. And 400 men, they had been left to suffer with syphilis long after a cure. Penicillin was available, but they were not treated for this, disease. Again, they were left to suffer just to see the impact. So such kind of, the unethical experiments were going on at that time period. So that's why there was a need to bring these ethic codes into force. And the first code that brought into force, that was the Nuremberg Code. I don't know, you have heard about this Nuremberg Code, but the kind of ethical guidelines that we have been following right now, the first code was the Nuremberg Code. And this is a set of the 10, the guidelines for the ethical treatment of the human participants in the research. And it was introduced into the 1949. So, in 1945, how this, Nuremberg Code came into force when, World War II ended in 1945. The victorious Allied powers, they enacted the International Military Tribunal on November 1945. And as a part of this tribunal, a series of trials were held against the major war criminals, prisoners of war, and especially the Nazi sympathizers. And at that time period, they were holding very strong or potential positions in the political, military, and the economic area. The first trial that was conducted under the Nuremberg Military Tribunal in 1947, and that was famously known as a doctor's trial, because in this, the 23 physicians from the German Nazi party, they were tried for the crimes against humanity, for the atrocious experiments they carried out unwillingly on the prisoners of the wars, and the Jewish prisoners, they were even, they were tattooed with the dehumanizing numbers on their arms so that they could be identified after their death. So such kind of, the inhuman experimentations or monstrous kind of, the medical experiments were going on at that time period. So out of the 23 defendants, 16 were found guilty and 7 received death sentence and 9 received 10 years to life imprisonment and the other 7 were acquitted. So this verdict is very famous, and this resulted into the creation of the Nuremberg Code, which is a set of the 10 ethical principles while carrying out any human experimentation. So these are the 10 elements of this code. Like the voluntary consent of the participants, that is very much essential. So as a young researcher, if you are going out there in the field, so you need to take the consent of any participants, right? So there is a form for that. So you need to take the formal approval of the participants or the subjects who are under study. And the results of any experiment, they must be for the greater good of the society. And human experiment should be based on the previous animal experimentation. It is never like that the medicine, any kind of drug or any kind of testing is directly being done on the human beings. So previous animal experimentation results, if they are favorable, only then we carry further the human experiments. And experiments should be conducted by avoiding any kind of physical, mental suffering or any kind of injury. And no experiment should be conducted if it is believed to cause death or disability. These all are the, these all are the ethical codes for carrying out the research in the human beings. And risk should never exceed the benefits. We always say the benefits must outweigh the risk. That we need to, while we are, making that research design or research process is there, we need to understand this fact, the kind of studies we are going to conduct. Benefits always must, outweigh the risk. And adequate facilities should be used to protect the subjects, and experiments should be conducted only by the qualified scientists. And subjects should be able to end their participation at any time. It's not like that you have taken the consent form and then you feel like now the participant is all yours. At any stage, if participant feels like he or she is not comfortable by sharing the information or by the kind of the studies you are conducting on those subjects, they can end their participation, they can take the exit. And the scientist in charge must be prepared to terminate the experiment when injury, disability, or death is likely to occur. So that's why this is done under the supervision of the qualified scientist or the qualified people. So 25 years later, related with this, the Belmont report in 1979 came into force. And this Belmont report, this was also like a set of the ethical guidelines for experimentation on the human subjects, especially in the field of the biomedical and the behavior sciences. And informed by the monthly discussion that spent nearly 4 years and intensive 4 days of deliberation in 1976, the Commission published this Belmont report, which identifies basic ethical principles and the guidelines that address ethical issues arising from the conduct of the research with the human subjects. So this report was also directly dealing with the research activities with the human subject. But yes, this was especially in the field of the biomedical and the behavior sciences. So three basic principles of the Belmont report was there: the principle of the respect of the person, beneficence, and justice. So as per this Belmont report in 1979, individuals should consent to participate in studies, and those who cannot give their consent, like the children or the people with the impaired abilities or the prisoners, they need to be protected. And the researchers not harm the participants, minimize the risk, and maximize the possible benefits. And there should be fairness in the procedures for selecting the participants. Now the question arises, why there is a need to ensure the understanding? Like why there is a need to ensure the understanding, especially with the human subjects? Because what happens, I've seen it a number of times as a researcher, as a scholars, often tell the participants exactly what will be done in this study, but they don't explain why. So that's why you need to explain the purpose of your study to the participants. If you're hiding any kind of information from the participants, you are being dishonest with the participants. And that is exactly against the ethical guidelines, ethical principles. So similarly, telling the participants about the research doesn't necessarily mean they are informed. Like you have just given the brief up about your research work, especially in those cases where the participants, they may not be competent enough to understand, like in case of children or mentally impaired or some, the elderly people, they're not able to understand, or we can say the uneducated people are there. So you need to explain the purpose of your study, why you are conducting this kind of research, and what kind of outcome you are going to expect, and how your research is going to benefit the society at large. So such kind of explanation you need to give to the participants. And then comes to the voluntarily participation of the participants. And most of the time, the researcher, they convey the message in such a way, the participants, they feel pressurized, right? They feel like they have to participate and they don't have any, other options. They are having very limited choice because the things are being communicated in such way. So this is entirely on the participants, on the subjects, whether they want to participate or not. If you're forcing the participants to be the subject matter for your, the research studies, again, you are breaking that, the moral code or the ethical code of the conduct. Deception, this is most common. You are deceiving the participants. That's why there is a justification why we need to ensure like everything is all right, why we are having these ethical guidelines and the ethical committees, and in each institute, so the university, we are having those, the institutional review board, which are taking care of such kind of activities. So deception is very much common. So in one part, you feel like you play smart and you just, withholding and omitting the information that you really don't want to share with the, the participants. Because as a researcher, you feel like if I will share this part of the information, the participants may say no to me. He or she would not be able to, participate or willing to participate in my research work. And you are very much in the need of those subjects. So what do you do as a researcher? You withhold or omit certain kind of information, which you feel like might cause any kind of discomfort to the subjects. Then in the active deception, that is just presenting the misinformation about the study to the participants. In this, simply, you are not telling the specific purpose of your study to the participants. So you are entirely misleading the participants. So active and passive deception, both are very much common nowadays. So if in any case, if you feel like under certain circumstances, if your review board allows you, there is a justified deception, so your deception must be justified, which we say like your outcome is carrying very significant benefit for the society, and your benefits, they are overweighing the risk to the participants. Only those cases you can justify your deception. right? And before going for the deception, you need to, as a researcher, you need to consider all the alternatives. And when you feel like, okay, there is no other alternative, then yes, you can go for passive deception. But yes, after, when your study is complete, then you need to go for the debriefing. You have to explain each and every point to the participants. What was the reason for the deception? Whether it's an active or passive deception, you have to give the debriefing that provides a full description of the true purpose of the study, including the use and purpose of deception. Even you need to elaborate why you have deceived that participant after your study is completed. So debriefing, that is very much important part if you anyhow is participating in this the deception part. Though as per ethical principles or ethical guidelines, we don't recommend to go for any kind of deception to the participants. Everything must be crystal clear. Then confidentiality of the participants, these are always kept anonymous. There is no need to share. You can't share. This is confidential matter. You can't share the identity. You can't share the results or the data, any kind, whether it's a raw data or in the final form. You can't share with anybody else. So this is entirely confidential. So I have already said the institutional review board that is required to establish a committee called the institutional review board, which is composed of both the scientists and the non-scientists. And this is mandatory requirement for each institution or the agency or any, the research organization. So that's why this, the COPE, in simple words, we say COPE, and most of you might have heard about this term. This is the Committee on the Publication Ethics, especially the students who are pursuing PhD. They are aware of this term. So Committee on Publication Ethics, it was founded in 1977. This is just a bunch of pals who are editors and who help each other out with their ethical problems. So I can say this is an informal editor support group. So they used to support each other. And they advise on cases brought by the editors, any kind of, the violation of the copyrights is there. So they sort out those kind of cases, any kind of redundant publication, simultaneous duplicate publication is there, overlapping of the material, if there are any cases of the plagiarism, some kind of scientific misconducts are involved. So they advise on such kind of cases. They publish an annual report, then they publish guidance on the ethics of publishing. They promote research into the publication ethics. They offer even training to the researcher and to the scientist, even to the teachers as well. So that's why, there is a requirement of these ethical issues, which I have explained, like most importantly, to protect the rights of the participants, to protect the rights of the subjects, on which you are carrying out your research activities. So that's why there is a need to set those ethical guidelines, and we need to follow those ethical principles. Now let's come to the another important part, that is the ethical issues and the scientific misconducts, because this has been happening a lot nowadays, because the young researchers, the scholars, they are really in the race to get their paper published, and they are making hasty decision. Maybe intentionally they are not doing it, but either this is publish or perish pressure is there. So that is just adding to the quantity, but that is not adding anything into the quality. So you can see in this picture describes a lot. One person that is is writing any notes, and the other three, they're just stealing. So there are ethical issues in the research, and this is happening in each and every laboratory in one or other way. And nowadays the young researchers, they feel like, okay, Googling is a research. No, Googling is not a research. That is for the information. So they are just copying the material from the internet and pasting it and creating a new document and feel like they have done some kind of excellent research. These all are the the research misconduct or the scientific misconduct. So basically research misconduct or the scientific misconduct, if I say, they may occur at each and every stage of the research process. And we know the research process, there is a data generation, then recording is there, reporting is there, review and publication, dissemination of the scientific knowledge. At any time, you can misinform the participants, misinform the readers. So this scientific misconduct, it may occur at every stage of the research process. And this is directly the violation of the standard codes of the scholarly conduct and the ethical behavior in the publication of the professional scientific research. So when we talk about the scientific misconduct, that means it is fabrication, it is falsification, it is plagiarism, any kind of plagiarism that we will be discussing in details later on. Violation of the authorship rules in proposing, performing, or reviewing the research. This is also one of the major issue. So that's why we say when you are working as a team or working on a same project, 4 or 5 people or 10 people, you need to decide who is going to be the first author, second author, third author, or corresponding author, to avoid such kind of the issues at the later stages. So scientific misconduct, this is the violation of the standard code of the scholarly conduct and the ethical behavior in the publication of the professional scientific research work. You can see in this picture, I guess this is quite visible to everyone. In science, we carry these kind of, the experiments, and there is no mice, there is no injection, and still we are having the results with ourselves. That is the research misconduct. Like we never performed any kind of experiments. There was no lab, but still we are having our data with ourselves. That is like cooking up data, making up of data. This is an example of the research misconduct. Now, how prevalent is a fraud? If we talk about the scientific misconduct, how often does scientific misconduct occur? According to Department of Health and Human Services USA, received 267 reports of research misconduct in 2004. And there was a 50% increase from 2003. Now you see, in 1 year, 50% increase in the research misconduct. And 35% of the closed cases involve the research misconduct. Now you see, and what is it not? When we say this is not a research or scientific misconduct, when there is any kind of honest error, we always say human error is there, equipment error is there, some environmental factors are also there, or differences of the opinions. And we can easily find out whether, the research misconduct or scientific misconduct, that is intentional or knowingly, deliberately done by the scholars, or unknowingly, or we can say this is an honest error, and we can easily differentiate. So why does this misconduct happen? This is a great question. Publish or perish pressure, I said. For the academic promotion, the people, they are having that desire to get ahead, to get the academic promotions, and for that they need publications. So they just go for this, the shortcut method. They don't want to go for that long method, and even they don't go for the replicates. And if they feel like the values are not within the permissible limit or what they have accepted, so what they do, they just manipulate the data, right? Because they are not having that much of time, and they want 5 to 10 paper to be published in 1 year. So that kind of pressure is there on the the budding researcher or the young researcher, and personal problems, and definitely sometimes it is an habit formation. This is what I feel. The character issues are there. You can't avoid it. So what are the top 10 behaviors, poor behaviors, I would say, in the research? This you must know because you are the young researcher and you are attending these sessions. So as you have been attending these sessions, so I want to communicate to you like nothing is impossible. If you want to feel like you want a good number of publication or quality publication, you can have it. Okay, if you have put yourself into the research activity, definitely you will end up with good number of publication as well as the quality publication. But rather than the falsifying or cooking up the research data, and sometimes you just ignore the major aspects of the human subject requirement because you just want to get the output, you just want to need the results, and there is a point where you forget about all the ethical principles. And most of the time, they're not properly disclosing the involvement in the firms whose products are based on the one's own research. And then there is a relationship, of course, with the students, with the research subjects or the clients. And if any kind of, such things are there, that may be interpreted as a questionable. So these are the top poor behavior in the research. Then using another ideas. This has been happening a lot. This is stealing. Like I'm having very the important idea in my mind, and 2 or 3 friends, I'm sharing that idea with 2 or 3 friends, you know so they are just after 1 week, I come to know, okay, they have proposed a research proposal on the same idea which I shared with them. This is stealing. But yes, for that, if I haven't protected that idea, or there is no copyright for the same, so I haven't used my IP or intellectual property right, then I can't claim this is my idea. So this has been happening a lot nowadays, using another ideas without obtaining permission or giving credit to the author of the original, the research. Then unauthorized use of the confidential information in connection with the one's own research. I said the confidentiality, that is very much important. We can't reveal the information of the participants or the subjects. So if unauthorized use of that confidential information is there, that is one of the, I would say, the poorest behavior in the research, and failing to present the data that contradicts one's own previous research. So now the question arises, why research misconduct matters? I always say, it's like a domestic violence. We didn't recognize it, yet we see it a lot. So it is very difficult to, be recognized whether it comes under research misconduct, because as a reader, I'm just, reading the findings of the other researchers or the scientists, and I'm assuming they have carried out a long experimentations in the lab or out there in the field setting, or they have collected data. So for me, that is an authentic data, But yes, it is, as I said, I can't recognize it until unless I go for the detailed studies and I am having that much of, the experience in the same field, and I'm going for some kind of statistical analysis. Only then I would be able to find out, okay, some kind of, the discrepancy is there, and violation of some, the copyrights is there. And if I am very much into the, the research work, but yes, for the young researcher, for the budding researcher, it is very hard to recognize whether it's a research misconduct or they are reading an original piece of research. And it undermines the public trust in the medical research and the health professionals, especially when research misconduct takes place in, the medical sciences or in the health professionals. It actually undermines the public trust. So in these areas, we need to be very careful and to go by the ethical principles. And it corrupts the scientific records and lead to the forced conclusion. And that is the reason I have mentioned over there, the many countries we see when we Google, they are very much into the research work. They are doing excellent research work, excellent publications are there, but they don't have good system neither for the prevention nor for the treatment of any kind of disease. So what we conclude from such kind of, the activities? This is simply, we say, okay, some kind of manipulations are there, or some kind of, the research misconduct or the scientific misconduct could be there. Because after doing so much of intensive research, if they are not having very good, the medical system, and they are not able to find cure for any kind of, the medicine. I'm not talking about like these, these short-term vaccines, which the scientists, they are after like within a year, even case of COVID-19. So every pharmaceutical firm was rushing for this vaccine, so we are having, the results are with us, but still there are countries there when we can put the question mark, who are very excellent performer in the research. But at the time of this COVID-19, when everybody is looking for some, the complete 100% cure for this virus, and still the question is there, and they are nowhere in the, even they are not even in the race. So this puts actually a question mark. And this where we feel like, okay, the research misconducts or the scientific misconducts are there. So I would like to give the brief up about the types of the scientific misconducts. This is just for your understanding. And this is the part where we look for your active participation. So I have already discussed the ethical guidelines and why this is required. So I will keep asking a question in between. So you can see this picture depicts a lot. The scientific misconducts are there. You can see the experimentation is going on, and there is a manipulation. Like you can change the value of the your equipment. You can, while calibrating your equipment, standard error is always there. But yes, if you want your result to be within one specific range, then manipulation is always there. You can see the lot of stealing is there. And then in this picture, you can see if you don't get the desirable results, you are just throwing out those, the experiments. So you are omitting that part from your experiments, because you have conducted, you have put those 2 or 3 replicates. And if you say the significant variations are there, and those significant variations are not able to justify your problem of statement or hypothesis, at that time period, what you do? That one part where you feel like, okay, there is a significant error, you just eliminate that data and pick that data which you were expecting. So this is where the kind of, the research rather than putting up the whole experiment again, you're just keeping those results which are favorable, which you were expecting, right? So what you were expected, if your observed values are not within the range of your expected values, accordingly you manipulate your data. Then copy paste, this is most common. Google is there, so that's why everybody nowadays, they're not even putting efforts to note down, they're just doing this thing, copy paste, copy paste. So these all are the types of the scientific misconducts. So first I would like to elaborate is the falsification, because falsification, this is the most common form of the scientific misconduct. Many of you might not have heard about these terms. They have heard about research misconducts are there. Yes, people do fabricate the data, they manipulate the data, they create the data, in fact, so but they are not aware of such kind of terms. When we use this falsification, I tell you, this is the most common form of the scientific misconduct. In China, 2006, 40% of the investigated misconduct cases were the falsifications. So basically, what is this falsification? Falsification is the alteration of the observed results of the scientific experiments. Like you have conducted one experiments, and then you feel like my experiments, they are not within my, what I was expecting. So accordingly, you manipulate your results. So basically, this is the practice of manipulating the research material or the equipment, as I said, during calibration, right? Or you can change the value, you can change the range in the equipment, and changing or omitting the data or the results which you feel like the research is not accurately represented in the research record. So such kind of falsifying the data, this is most common form of the scientific misconduct, right? And this falsification, this is being done most commonly with the intention of improving the results or removing the results that don't fit with the hypothesis. So at the end of the day, as a researcher, what you want to do, you just want to justify your hypothesis rather than repeating the experiments again or to collect the correct information. Nowadays, the researchers, they just try to manipulate the data, alter the data. And that is why the findings, the scientific findings or any other kind of findings by the budding researchers nowadays, they are not able to contribute significantly for the society at large, because the falsification is there, the fabrication is there. I have cited few examples of the research falsification, like changing a measurement to make it look higher or lower. If you want, okay, pH must be around 7.5, but during experiments, your is around 8. And what you will say, okay, previous researcher, you have studied the work of the previous researchers, and what you will do, okay, mine is 8 and they are having 7.5. So let's, manipulate the data, and you will write 7.77. So this is, the falsification of the data. Then in the medical sciences, like brightness, they increase the brightness of, particular gel band and not the other gel band in the same photo. So that highlights one point. So contrast is there, then cropping is there, then brightness enhancement is there, and then adding error bar to the single measurements to suggest multiple measurements were performed. So while you are making histogram or the graph, you just put, simple, you add bars, and just to show like the multiple measurements were performed, though in reality it was never there. That was a single measurement, but yes, on the single measurement you have put those the bars. But yes, during statistical analysis, or the experts in the fields, they can easily find out you have manipulated the data. Then duplicating, you can see in this picture, this is the same picture, A and the B, but you see in the B picture there is, this duplicating of some cells are there. So this is just the duplication of the cells, just to show the cell density that is on the higher side in the B experiment. Though this is just one experiment, this is one picture under the microscope, but the treatment resulted into higher density, that is being shown by not carrying out any experiments. That is being shown by using some kind of, the technique or the Photoshop, and they are just duplicating the cells. So these kind of research falsifications are there, and the experts in the fields, they can easily find out. This is what I want to convey. So this is not a smart play. If you are using the technology for creating such kind of falsification, they are the experts sitting over there who have created this technology, so they can easily find out some kind of manipulations are there. So same I have cited over there in picture. I think we need to move forward now. Cropping, brightness, selective enhancement of some specific area, then color adjustment. These all are, then cloning on object. So what are the implications? We know that it affects the research integrity, reproducibility of the outcome, and may result in the paper retraction. And nowadays, a large number of paper retractions are taking place. And of course, it damages your reputation and career position also at any stage. I will share a few examples further. Now let's come to the fabrication. So falsification is a different thing, like manipulation of the data, and fabrication is entirely different. You can see in this picture above, like there was no experimentation. As I said earlier, there was no mice, there was no injection, there was no experiment, still we are having the data. So that is like creating a new record of the data or the results. So this is the invention of the data or the information, right? And according to the study from 2004, fabrication is the second most common form of the scientific misconduct, comprising 22% of the studied cases plus 27% of the cases labeled fabrication. So fabrication is there. Like if you are carrying out an experiments in the laboratory for the 6 month or 7 month, and you are not getting the desirable results, and you are having that failed experiments, and at the end of the day, you have created your own data by, the reviewing the literature or the work of the previous authors, and you are just trying to fit in their range. But fabrication, it can be, found out at later on stage. I have cited few examples of the fabrication cases in the news. Diederik Stapel, a former professor of social psychology in the Netherlands, who made up most of his data, has currently over 58 retracted paper. Retraction means their papers, the research articles were withdrawn, right? Then we are having the example of the Yoshitaka Fuzzy, a Japanese researcher, with over 180 retractions, you see, and 126 of which were totally fabricated, means there was no experimentation carried out for these research papers, and 126 were totally fabricated, totally creation of the data. And right now only one of these is currently listed on the PubPeer. You see 180 retractions, this matters a lot. So fabrication is also very much common. And you are a professor, you are a researcher, you are holding some, very reputable position in the politics. At any stage, if they find out like fabrication, falsification, plagiarism is there, it can ruin your career. So you need to be very careful, right? So as a young researcher, you might not be aware of the consequences, but I tell you, it leads to severe consequences, and it can ruin your whole future or career. Then we are having Yoshihiro Sato, Japanese-born researcher who passed away in 2017 and was found to have fabricated at least 20 of his studies. I've cited the example of these researchers because these are the well-known researchers, and they were having their publication in the Lancet, Springer, elsewhere. So you can see the fabrication is there. But if as a researcher you are reading the paper of the Diederik Stapel and you feel like, okay, social psychology, I'm reading the paper or this, the well-reputed scientist, and you are just taking it as a normal study like he has conducted, you will never come to know data that is fabricated. And there is only one way to find out statistical analysis in the fabrication that is very sportive, that can be detected if we go for the careful statistical analysis of the data. Because in the image duplication, or if there is a textual similarities, so we can easily see, right, the duplication is there. But yes, if data fabrication is there, how would I know whether the researcher has performed experiments or not, right? So merely by looking at the published paper, it is very harder to detect. And these cases, like where the data is fabricated, like you are working in a team, 5 or 6 people, they are working in a team. So whistleblowers are the people who are working in close proximity with you. They are the whistleblowers. They are the ones who at the end, they feel like they share this kind of, the information, the data is fabricated. So no experimentation was there. So only they can, the whistleblowers can bring the reality to the public. Or on the other case, and statistical analysis, that is also one of the way to find out if the data is fabricated or the experimentations was carried out. Now the next is the plagiarism. Plagiarism, this is the, I say this is not like falsification or fabrication, because manipulations are not there. This is just like stealing the work of the other authors, like without giving credit to the author of the original research. So without any kind of the attribution. So you don't acknowledge the actual source in the plagiarism. And this is most frequent type of the misconduct and major breach of the ethics, I say. And mostly the young researchers, the scholars, the PG student, even undergraduate students, they are most likely into the plagiarism. They are not into that much into the fabrication or the, the falsification. But yes, they are most likely to be involved into this plagiarism. Okay, so this is, that's why I said this is different from falsification and the fabrication. Here you are just stealing the work of the other authors, right? Without giving credit or without giving proper citation or attribution to the scientist or the researcher of the original work. So this has been happening a lot nowadays, where you see a student is telling his teacher, what do you mean all my facts are wrong? I copied everything straight off the internet. Now you see, this is plagiarism. Like he has stolen the work of the other authors and created one document and presented it as its own document, right? And still he is questioning and very confidently he is telling, I copied everything straight off the internet. So if you copy anything from the internet and presenting it as your own work, that is a stealing, that is a plagiarism, and it has severe consequences. Now the different types of plagiarism is there, and what type of plagiarism or the things are acceptable in the research, that I will be elaborating. In the global plagiarism, that means you are just taking the entire work by somebody else and passing it off as your own, right? And like if you hired somebody for any kind of writing an essay or assignment for you, and if you find any text online and submit as your own work, these all are like you're committing a plagiarism, right? If you're hiring somebody and writing somebody for you, that is also a plagiarism, because it involves deliberately and directly lying about the authorship of the work. So you are not doing it unintentionally, you are doing it deliberately. Okay, and this is one of the most serious type of the plagiarism, and it can have severe consequences, right? Then we are having paraphrasing plagiarism, like where you are just rephrasing a piece of a text in your own words. The rest of the text, you are keeping it as such, and a piece of text you have rewritten in your own language. But paraphrasing itself is not a plagiarism so long as you properly cite this, the sources, actual source. So if you have done the rephrasing of the text, that is perfectly all right, but you need to mention the name of the authors, the author of the original work with the year. So proper in-text citation must be there. Then in that case, paraphrasing is not plagiarism, but yes, paraphrasing without citation is the most common type of the plagiarism. Then we are having this verbatim plagiarism. Verbatim plagiarism is simply copy paste. Like you commit verbatim plagiarism when you directly copy text from the source and paste it into your own document without attribution, without acknowledging the source. And in this, the researchers, they just, the most of the majority of the words or the structure of the text, they are same as in the original, right? And what they do, they just, delete a few lines or a couple of lines they delete, or there is addition of, the few words in the sentences. So that is there, and they feel like they have changed the text. No, this is verbatim plagiarism. This is copying and pasting and stealing the work of the other authors. Then we are having a mosaic plagiarism. Yes, this type of plagiarism, it requires a little bit more efforts. Especially when the students, the scholars, they are writing the review articles. When we ask them to write the review articles, most commonly they are into this mosaic plagiarism, right? So they have studied, suppose the 30 or the 40 research articles. And what they have done, they have picked up 4 or 5 lines from each, the research articles. And then they have created a new articles. So they feel like, okay, they have done so much of hard work, like they have studied those 40 research articles, then they picked up the highlights of those, they copied the text from those research articles and then pasted it and created the new article. And basically they reframed that document. That is a mosaic plagiarism. This is what we say is the patchwork plagiarism. In patches, you have stolen the work. Rather than stealing it from the one source or from the one shop, you have been visiting 30 or 40 shops and you are stealing, one item from here, second from there, third from here. Ultimately, this is a plagiarism, right? So yes, this includes rephrasing the passages. So what I suggest when you write any kind of the review article, I always tell the scholars you write it in your own words without changing the outcome or the findings of the researcher, because you are there to to compare the results or for the comparative analysis of the previous researchers. So you are going to use their findings, but not like this copy paste. You have to rewrite those findings in your own words. And yes, in brackets, you need to mention the actual source. You need to give the credit to the author of the original research work. And trust me, if you feel like you have stolen the work from the 40 or the 50 research articles and you will not get caught, no. A number of sophisticated plagiarism checking softwares are there. Turnitin is there, Arcund is there, Authenticate is there. These are the kind of the plagiarism checking softwares that can easily detect like from where you have stolen the work. They will tell you the sources, the papers, the website. They will give you each and every link, right? So this patchwork plagiarism or the mosaic plagiarism, this is also detectable. Then plagiarizing your own work, like you have already published one research article, right? And afterwards, or you have already, written one assignment, right? So from that assignment, you have, that assignment for your PG degree. Now you can't submit the same assignment or the same research work for getting another degree. That comes under self-plagiarism. You have already published your, the paper, but afterwards, after 1 or 2 years, you can't republish the same, the findings, because what the researchers are doing, they just change the title, little bit of changes in the abstract is there, and then your rest of the paper, the outcome, the conclusion, even your hypothesis, you are keeping it the same. That comes under the self-plagiarism. But yes, you can use your research article in your, the thesis work or anywhere for as a reference. Okay? that you can do it, but not you can go for the duplicate publication, right? So that is also being done by most of the students by just changing merely the title or the abstract, and the hypothesis is same, outcome is same. So this is like you are stealing your own work. But if you are using it as a reference for the another research work, then again you need to give the complete information. You need to mention the complete information of your previously published work. Now, how you can avoid the plagiarism? If you are worried about the accidental plagiarism, like honest error is there, and you feel like, okay, there could be the chances of, unintentional plagiarism or the accidental plagiarism, then the softwares are aware. A large number of online software are available where you can check about the plagiarism, though they are not 100% accurate. Anyhow, you will get some idea. Otherwise, in the institutes, they are having the subscription to the Arkund or Authenticate or the Turnitin is there. These are the kind of the softwares which actually get into each and every detail, minute detail, and they are having very high level of accuracy and the security. So this is how you get the report of plagiarism, checking various the software. You see it. These are few of the software I have mentioned. Now, this is the last part. We come to the redundant publication in the researcher. Many of the researchers, they ask me, ma'am, what are the redundant publication? When we appear for the interview, they ask me whether it's a redundant publication, duplicate publication, or if I submit any, the kind of the research article, they ask me, have you done the simultaneous publication? So I will be elaborating, not in detail, but I would like to give the brief up about the redundant publication for the better understanding for this, the young researcher. So what is this duplicate publication or a simultaneous publication? Basically, redundant publication are the duplicate publication. This is the publication of a paper that is substantially similar to a published paper by the same author. Like you have already published a paper, what I was saying, kind of self-plagiarism, you can say. You have already published that paper, but the publication of the paper similar to the published paper by the same author. And again, with the same finding, only with, there is a superfluous differences between the original and the second paper. Like, as I said, new title is there. You can, you have modified the abstract, but the same data set you are using, and your findings and the conclusion stay the same. That is a case of the duplicate publication. And this has been happening a lot. Then there is an overlapping publication. In the overlapping publication, yes, few, these journals, they are having very stringent policy. They ask the authors to submit the previous reports of the previous publications, right? So they ask for the reports to submit if they feel like the overlapping cases are there, like 20 to 30% of your research article that is entirely the data is taken from the previous publication of you, right? And the rest is the new one. But you need to, submit the report of the previous published paper. So this is the presentation of the redundant data in a multiple papers by the same author. And it is a practice that warrants very serious discussion. Like as an author, you may ask the same question with the different data set, or they may ask the different question with the same data set. So sometimes you just, hold your ear like this and sometimes like this on the other side. So this is one and same thing. So overlapping publication, that is not, advisable, but many, that depends on the percent of the overlapping. Few, the research journals, they permit 10 to 15% of the overlapping, right? And in many journals, they just allow few words, like a few lines or few words of the previous publications are similar. That is acceptable. Otherwise, if 5%, 3%, 5% overlapping is there, they simply reject your paper for the publication. Now, this is the question for the audience. Can we publish the same data twice? Anyone? Yes, one by one. Can we publish the same data twice? Anyone?
No,
Yes, please mute yourself. थोड़ा background noise है. Anyone would like to answer it? Can we publish the same data twice? Yes, anybody? Hanji, students from Ratan Bhara University. Can we publish the same data twice? This is a very simple question, and I have just to one slide back, I have given the answer for the same. Anybody?
Ma'am, it will be under
Yes, please.
yes, ma'am. It will be under duplication and redundant publication. So I think we cannot publish twice.
Okay. Now you see the answer. Very right. Usually publishing the result of the same data set, that is considered as an overlapping publication or a duplicate publication, especially if your hypothesis, raw data, main study findings, and conclusion of both the publications are same. And then the second paper published later on, that might be regarded as a duplicate publication. Very good, well done. Now the second question for the audience, can I use my published paper in my thesis? Even I have answered this question back in 3 or 4 slides back. Can I use my published paper in my thesis? Anyone?
Yes, ma'am, but by giving the reference.
Yes, very right, very right. I'm really glad like you guys are actually catching it and getting it. It is perfectly acceptable to use one of your previously published paper as your thesis chapter. This is known as cumulative thesis, you know. But to avoid the copyright issues, you need to take the permission from the journal where your paper was published. You know, at the time of the publication, there is a copyright form, there is undertaking transform, copyright transfer form is there, and in which we give all the rights to the publishers, to the research journals. So if we want to publish or use our own research paper in our thesis, we need to take the permission from the journals where your paper was published, and we have to cite the source in a proper way. So in text, citation must be there, and the complete information or the detailed information of that previous paper, that must be there in the reference list. So why this duplicate publication is a problem? Republication of a paper without permission, it is a serious breach of the publication ethics. It violates copyright, as I said, like copyright for the paper that lies with the journal, not with the authors. So at the time of the publication, what we do, we transfer our rights to the research journals or to the editors or to the publishers. So yes, it violates the copyright law. We need to take the permission if we want to publish the same data. And it could distort the empirical evidence, because as a researcher, as a reader, you know, if I'm studying the subject, I may incorrectly count the same set of results twice, because I will feel like these are two separate papers. So I will assume these are two independent studies. So as empirical studies form the basis for the policies and other medical and scientific decisions, this is a serious problem. And of course, it amounts to the self-plagiarism. Definitely, it is there. So there is another case study. Now listen carefully, participants. An author has published an article in a regional English language journal published by his university. The author then submits the paper for publication to a journal based in US. Would this be considered a case of duplicate publication? Anyone? He has already published a paper in the university research journal, and after a few years, he wants to publish the same paper to the international journal based in US. Is this a case of duplicate publication? Anyone?
Yes, ma'am. It will be if he published without information.
Yes, very right.
Without
very
informing.
Right. Yes. The author must inform the second journal, like the university journal. He has to take the permission from the university journal as well. Like he wants to publish these findings again. And the author must inform the second journal where he's going to publish this already published paper in the university journal. And he also needs to submit the report of the previously published paper over there. Otherwise, it would be a case of redundant publication or a duplicate publication. And most of the cases, the researchers or the scholars, they feel like they will not get code. They get code. Trust me, after 5 years, 10 years, even after 20 years, I have seen a number of cases. So be careful. Okay. So whatever you publish ethically. Follow all the ethical guidelines. So what do journals and the ethical guidelines have to say about the issue? You know, the ethical and the editorial committees and the academic journal instruct authors not to submit papers or the variations of the paper on studies that have already been published elsewhere. If your work is already been published, then don't submit it. Okay, as I've already discussed, the several journals, they have stringent policies like that require author to send copies of the older or related articles along with the submitted paper if they find like the study finding and the subjects overlap. In that case, they need to submit the report of the previously published research journal. And some journals, they are very specific and require this will be done when the overlap is more than a certain percent. Like as I said, some are like 5% is allowed, 10% is allowed. In some cases, even 15% is allowed. But yes, the good journals, the Sci or the Scopus, the Springer, elsewhere, they avoid such kind of overlapping publications. And others permits only a few identical sentences, right? If only, you know, I say the previously published results or larger portion of the text taken verbatim from the author's older publication without acknowledgement, that is not accepted. So if you're using few lines, you have to mention the source from where you have picked the, you know, the material or the findings, rather than, otherwise it will seem like a stealing. Right? So why simultaneous submission is a problem? So simultaneous submission, nowadays, the researchers, they are doing a lot. Simultaneous means you have written one publication, one research article is there. And just to be on the safer side, because if you are sending your paper for Scopus or, you know, Sci or for, you know, Springer or elsewhere, it takes sometimes, you know, duration 6 to 7 months, 1 year is there, depending upon, you know, the frequency of the publication and number of other factors are there. So just to be on the safer side, the researchers or the scholars, what they do, they go for the simultaneous publication. So at the same time, they send their research paper to 2 or 3 journals, and that is not ethically right? So in some exceptional cases, multiple submissions, they may be allowed, but that depends upon the, you know, the policy of the research journals. Some research journal they allow, but yes, you have to provide the details in what other journals you have submitted the research article. So you need to provide the details to all the, you know, the research journals, to the editors of the research journals, like you have submitted this research article for publication and you have done the simultaneous publication. So when the editors of the journals, they agree to simultaneously or jointly publish the paper, and most of the cases, few journals, they are flexible, you know, so they agree to simultaneously publish the paper. And some cases, what happens if your findings are very significant and the authors, editors of the journal, they feel like your work is going to contribute very significantly for the society at large, and that is in the best interest of the society. So in that case, they go for the simultaneous or the jointly, they can publish the paper. And in the second case, when the scientific conferences, they authorize author to simultaneously submit paper to the other meetings with overlapping submission periods. So again, that depends upon the scientific conferences, and some scientific conferences, they allow this overlapping publication. But for that, you need to be very careful. You have to read their guidelines, authors' guidelines, and accordingly, you need to make your decision to avoid any complication in the future. Now, there are these few suggestions to avoid the redundant publication. Like when submitting any kind of research article, an author should always make a full statement to the editor about all the submissions and previous reports that might be regarded as a redundant or a, you know, the duplicate publication of the very similar work. So there you need to give a full statement, like in these journals, you have submitted the same research article for the publication. And if duplicate publication is attempted without such notification, then author should expect editorial action to be taken. And at least the prompt rejection of the manuscript, that should be expected. That is always there. If it is not in the knowledge of the editor, or they are not, in the favor of the simultaneous publication, then you can expect a prompt rejection of your manuscript, right? And if you feel like, luckily, fortunately, I have escaped, I am having that, I had that narrow escape, and the editor was not aware of, the violation, or the article has already been published, then later on, if the editor or the journal comes to know the paper was already published and this is a duplicate, or the redundant publication case is there, then a notice of duplicate publication will be probably be published with or without the author explanation. Even they will not ask the author for the explanation, and they can take the legal action against you. So consequences could be very severe. Now, this is the last segment. I wouldn't be taking more than 5 minutes. I think I've already taking too much of time. This is also one kind of, the serious kind of a scientific or a research misconduct, the slimy slicing. I don't know, but yes, research scholars, they might have heard about this slimy slicing. And many authors nowadays, you can see in this picture, there is a big, the paper being sliced into the small, the pieces. So where the authors, they break up a large study into 2 or more smaller published articles, they are creating slices of their work. So what happens in this slimy slicing, actually, a single research, which could be very significant part of your, the research, that is being divided into a slices, each of which is a least publishable unit. Doesn't make any sense. Like, you have done an excellent work, and just to increase the quantity of the research, the papers, you are just slicing down your, the research work, and that research work, those slices make no sense. So where is the fun of using, doing that, those kind of, the extensive research studies, and doing all the laboratory work and putting all the efforts? So slimy slicing will get you nowhere, right? Yes, your quantity can be increased, but quality is not there. And you would not be able to justify your research work, your research outcome in a slices. That is not possible. So why do author or the researchers, they do it to increase the publication count, to get more recognition? In some universities or the institutes, it is always there, like their increment is based on the number of the publication, 10, 30, 50. The people, they are like that crazy, 50 publication, 300 publication, 500 publication. It is just like, whatever they are doing in their laboratories, they are just publishing it. And if they have done one set of experiments and all 3 factors are interrelated with each other, rather than going for the cumulative effect of all these 3 factors that could contribute significantly for the society, they will divide into the different 3 sections. Okay, this is the paper I have written for the first section, this is for the second, this is for the third section. So that is not, ethically right way to publish your research work, right? So they, to get more recognition, to achieve faster career progression, or sometimes to receive more funding, because some funding agencies, they release funds on the basis of your publications. So that is also one of the major reasons. So why is it unethical? You cannot break up a study into a part or present them as the separate studies. Slimy slicing is harmful to science, especially if you are doing slimy slicing in the medical sciences. For example, readers may believe that each slice which looks independent is a result of studies on different groups of subjects. So as a reader, I will feel like, okay, this is an independent studies, though that is a part of one single study. So as a reader, I am not aware. The author has sliced down the work into the 2 parts, right? And it leads to the self-plagiarism, and it also increases the author citation record. So that is the benefit to the author, but to the reader, that is not, that is unethical, because we are not getting the complete information. And even if I'm reading only one slice, and I'm not aware the 3 slices are there, and in some other journals are there, so I would never be able to correlate all the factors, and it is an unethical means of achieving career progression. So was it intentional? That we need to know. As a young researcher, I know the budding researcher, you guys are there, you are not doing it intentionally. That is unintentional, because most of the time the young researcher, they don't know the difference between slimy slicing, duplicate publication, simultaneous publication, or multiple submission. These are not allowed. So you are not aware. So that's why I always appreciate CBIOD is a kind of, a platform where all the researchers, or especially the young ones, the students of the graduate and the postgraduate level, the doctorate level, they are joining us, and they are getting this kind of information so that they can avoid such kind of mishappenings in the future, and they could, carry out their research work by following all the ethical guidelines. And so you are not doing it deliberately, but yes, if you are aware of the facts and the figures, still you are doing it, then this is, I say this is knowingly you are doing it, and legal action could be taken against you. And authors may find it difficult to decide whether they should publish the same study as a separate paper. So here, where I say the mentors or the supervisors, they can play a very significant role to guide their students, the scholars. Like this is one, one study. So they need to publish it as a one study rather than slicing down into the different parts. And sometimes author, they don't know, they are self-plagiarizing. So awareness, that is very much required. I've cited a few examples. Like there is one guy who's just thinking, I need to publish more papers soon. Maybe I should divide my original study into smaller parts and publish them separately. I guess that is the right thing to do. So this is like, thinking, because this guy is not aware, like slimy slicey is unethical. He just wants, more publications, quantity. He wants 3 publications, 4 publications for the career progression. So that's why he's thinking to break down its work into different slices, into the different parts. So rather than publishing one paper, he's publishing 3 or 4 research, articles without any potential outcome, right? So here, where the mentors or the supervisors, they play very significant role in guiding their research scholars. And sometimes I said many journals where you want to publish your research articles, it takes waiting is very long. Sometimes it takes 1 year. So it takes so long to hear from the journals. So as a researcher, you feel like, let me submit my paper to 2 or more journals at once. I will save time. It will save time. And one of them is bound to accept my paper. So the researcher, they don't want to take any kind of chance. So what they feel like, they say, okay, let's submit it to 3 or 4 research journals, and at least one of the research journal is bound to accept my paper. So anyhow, I will get my publication accepted. So that's why it results into the, the simultaneous or the multiple submissions. Now, how you can publish ethically? You can break down your paper into the smaller parts only if your study is very large. Like you have done one, a chemical part is there, then biological part is there, then there was some different part related with the bioremediation, or the water analysis was there, then soil studies were there. Yes, at the end, you can have that correlation coefficient and statistical analysis you can go for. But yes, where you feel like, okay, for the physical or the chemical parameters, you are having a separate results, there you can publish your research work into a smaller paper. Okay, so if your study is very large and addresses many distinct questions, so each of your paper might have that different kind of question with different types of the conclusion. So different hypothesis, different outcome, and different conclusion. There you can break up your paper into the smaller parts. If your study results, they are reanalyzed from a completely different angle or given a completely different treatment, then you can break down your paper into the smaller parts, your study. But avoid breaking up your data unless the study demands it. Don't do this, right? Now, focus on the quality of the publications, not the quantity. I always advise. At the end, quality matters. When you appear for any kind of interviews, they will simply ask you to give your best 3 research journals or 5 research journals. That's it. They will never ask you to give the list of your 50 best research journals or 100 research journals. Okay, so you need to, as a budding researcher, you are having a full life ahead of you. You will get a lot of time to do the research and to publish a quality work. So you focus on the quality of your publication, not on the quantity. With passage of time, once you will be having that zeal to produce the quality, definitely quantity will increase. Okay, you will get expert how to go for those medical writings to write it perfectly, and definitely the research publications will keep on adding in your kitty. But you need to focus on the quality of the publications. And if you are using data from that you have previously published, then make sure you cite in the textation. In text, citation must be there, and that must be there in the end of the reference list. If you feel like there is an overlap, make sure you declare this at the time of the submission to avoid any, later on any kind of issues or the problems on the side of the, on the behalf of the editors. If possible, submit copies of potentially overlapping studies along with your manuscript to the journal. In case if you have submitted the same paper to the another journal, inform the journal editor about it. So that is so that they may know that you don't intend to deceive them. Deceiving is not that. Like just to get your paper published, you have done this multiple submission. So at least it is showing your honesty. Then this would be at the discretion of the editor whether they allow the same or not. Okay, so you need to declare it at your own end. Unethical publications always lead into retraction. You can see these are the publications in the the elsewhere. They were retracted. So what is the use of wasting your the potential data by going for this the redundant publication or any kind of fabrication or the falsification of the data. I've cited this one example, and it is actually a mind awakening example when you feel like you are overconfident you will never get caught. Hungarian President Paul Schmidt, he has to officially resign due to plagiarism accusation. In 2010, he was elected to the office. And 20 years back, he wrote his doctorate dissertation on the modern Olympics. And it was found out like most of his work was copy and pasted from the work of the other authors. And ultimately on the moral ground, and as he was serving the country, nation, so on the moral ground, he has to resign after plagiarism accusation. So that's why I have been saying it can ruin your career. It can take your academic position. So you need to be very careful while carrying out any kind of, the experimentation in the laboratories. You need to avoid the scientific misconducts, and you need to publish the content of your research work ethically. Okay, so this is the last one, how you can maintain research ethics and avoid scientific misconduct. Before the conduct of the research, I have already suggested at each university or institution, there is an institutional review board. So you need to develop a clear research plan, who will do what, when, how. Even you need to submit the protocol to the ethical review board, then they can give a certain suggestion to you. You need to prepare well with your research community. You need to agree on the authorship. Otherwise, there is always fight, conflict of authorship is always there. Who are going to be in the list of the contributorship, who are going to be in the acknowledgement part, and who is going to be the first or second author, and who is going to be the, the corresponding author. That you need to decide before the conduct of the research. Then during the conduct of the research, follow the approved protocol. Right? Just stay on the line. And you gain consent from the participants, involve the community. You need to protect yourself, your team, and your participants, and regularly check your data. What happens, this is the progressive stage, because you are conducting the research right now. At the end, when you try to analyze the data and you feel like, oh, what I was expecting, my findings, they are not within, the observed values. They are not as per my expected values. So it's better in between, keep analyzing your data so that you will come to know you are on the right track, and your experimentations are doing really good, rather than at the end when you feel like, oh, I have already spent 2 years on this research work, now I can't repeat the whole process again and I have to fabricate or falsify the data. So it is not going to, trust me, it's not going to work anyhow. Yes, for time being, you can escape that, the part, but yes, later on, it can hamper your image, right? And after the research, you share your study reports, return something back to the research community. Like your research results must contribute significantly for this society. If your results are productive, they are contributing, and productive outcome is there is nothing like that, and you want to publish your research work, don't slice down your research work just to enhance the number of the publication. You need to publish your research work by following all the ethical guidelines. And yes, of course, you can use the nowadays we are having a large number of online reference management software are there. You can take the help of those softwares. And this is, I have already discussed the role of the mentors and the supervisor is there. They have the responsibility to ensure that all the trainees, they are aware of the responsible conduct of the research. If as a research scholars, you are not aware what are the scientific misconducts, research misconduct, falsification, fabrication, plagiarism, and you are entirely innocent and you are unknowingly or unintentionally, you are getting yourself trapped into these, the kind of the misconducts. So this is the responsibility of the supervisors and the mentors to ensure. So they can play a positive role modeling and responsible mentoring and supervision of the students and the training that is very much required. And at the same time, the scholars, they also need to aware themselves, right? Most of the time they are Googling the things. Why not to Google such kind of things and to enhance their knowledge once you are into a research? So this research journey of 3 or 4 years while you are carrying out the research, this is actually a foundation. This is actually a structure. Once the structure is ready, the foundation, the base is ready, then afterwards, after the completion of your doctorate or any project, and you will see you have mastered in the area, right? And then afterwards, there is no need to, even to consult anybody unless you feel like there is some kind of difficulty that you have been facing and you need some expert advice, only in that case. So I have put this picture over there. This is like as a scholar, you are meeting your, the chief of your lab or the head of the department, and she appreciates you, great manuscript, but the lab chief always gets listed first. Who said this? This is not the case. So that's why I said in the beginning, you need to decide who's going to be the first author. The first author who is there in the field, who is in the laboratory performing experiments, and then the second, third, the support system is there. Even your lab instructor can play a very important role. This you have to decide whether they are directly involved in your research work or they were working or supporting behind the curtain. So accordingly, you need to decide the authorship and the contributorship, right? This as a scholar, at least you need to aware, right? You need to aware of your rights. Okay, so just a second. Let's get back to the summary now. Can you see it? Slide is visible?
No, ma'am. Slide is not visible, ma'am.
Slide is not visible. Just a second. Okay, so this is a take-home message, I would say. Honesty is the best policy, and this is every way. Do you agree? So this is the, you need to be very honest while carrying out any kind of research activities, whether in the field or in the laboratory, or you're using any kind of the subjects, human subjects are there. So honesty is the best policy. You choose honest colleagues and the seniors for the research and the writing. This is suggestion for the budding researcher, because if you're working as a team, right? So you are being very honest while carrying out any kind of experimentations, but your teammates or the colleagues, they might not be honest, or they might be involved into some, the unethical practices. So you need to be very aware and very, the careful while choosing your colleagues and the seniors. Don't rush, plan ahead. Plan your proper research plan, make a research plan. There is a proper research process, we know. So go for that, make that proper research design and follow that proper research design. And in between, take breaks and look back and see everything is going okay, then move ahead, right? Then explore online resources. Now everything is just one click away. It is not I'm suggesting you to copy pasting the things or to stealing the data of others. To enhance your knowledge, to broaden up your horizons. So there you need to go online, search whatever topic you have picked up for your research activities, explore each and everything, and share whatever you learn. Go for the discussions, group discussions, and then you will see definitely you are getting out with something really, the marvelous. This is what makes you an outstanding researcher, right? Otherwise, everybody is doing a research, right? But if you want to get outstanding results, and if you want to, produce outstanding output, then you have to go extra miles, right? Then you need to lead by the example. That only you can set. So thank you very much, dear participants. At the end, I would like to say, live your life by ethics and publish ethically. And I'm very, very much thankful to all of you. I know I have taken enough time for being the patient listeners and for your active participation. For those who participated actively, thank you very much. And I hope that you might be taking something good home today and be following its ethics and the standard codes of conduct while carrying out any kind of research activity, right? This I suggest you. Follow ethical principles, ethical guidelines. So God bless you all. Stay safe and don't forget to wear mask while going out. Corona is still there. Third wave is coming. I'm not scaring you, but just to be on the safer side, you need to wear the mask. Thank you very much. Over to you, Rima.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And I'm Siddhant. So
thank you, Siddhant. Thank you very much.
Yeah, ma'am. So thank you so much, ma'am, for such a great lecture, such a great thing you have explained to us today. And I hope students will take something from this. So yeah, I think so. This is much for the today's session. And yes, we will be hoping to meet you sooner in future for your great sessions.
Sure, sir. Sure. Definitely, I will be there. And thank you so very much because I know the time is already, we have taken half an hour. Yes. So it's okay. I hope the purpose is to disseminate the knowledge and it has served its purpose. Rest, I'm available, and the students, they can take my number or they can contact me in person if they're having any queries, or they can drop me an email. So thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Siddhant. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yeah, and before leaving, a very quick reminder, just fill a feedback form, which will be shared via email or by any online platform. And yeah, so next week, same time, new session, and you will be informed about the same earlier. So till then, stay tuned. Bye. Thank you so much.
Thank you
so much, sir.
Okay.